Hello and welcome to the 50 Shades of Gender podcast. This is a platform where we get curious about all things gender, sex and sexuality, as well as feminism, the inclusive kind, mental health and kink, and all that makes us humans unique and diverse. From body positivity to body dysmorphia, it's all welcome here. Come with us on a journey of inclusion, acceptance and respect. I'm your host, Esther Lemons. I identify as a cisgender woman and my pronouns are she and her. In this episode, I'm speaking to Sarah, who uses mostly she, her, or also they, them pronouns. She found out she was intersex at age 19 and subsequently got involved with a local charity called Evolve, which supports transgender, genderqueer, gender questioning and intersex kids and young adults. She also identifies as non-binary. Find out what that means to Sarah in this episode. We also talk about Androgen Insensitivity Syndrome, Hormone Replacement Therapy, gonadectomy surgery, Queer Britain, being different and getting attention, being queer and bisexual, differences in sexual development or DSD, and intersex genital mutilation. It was recorded on the 8th of July 2020. Now let's get into the episode. Hello.
Hello.
What's your name?
Okay, I am Sarah and I am intersex and I identify as non-binary. Usually use she, her pronouns.
Okay, brilliant. So what does it mean, intersex? Can you sort of talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, intersex means that it's anybody who's born outside of the typical biological idea of male and female.
Mm-hmm.
So you've got a mix of a sexual characteristic of either of those two sexes. So that could be to do with the body, like genitalia, or internal reproductive organs like uterus or testes,
Mm-hmm.
and also to chromosomes. So like people being born with XXY chromosomes instead of XX or XY,
Mm-hmm.
or people who would outwardly appear to be female, like myself, who actually have XY chromosomes, which people would typically associate with a person being male. Hormonal differences as well. So at a more subtle level, differences in people's levels of certain hormones like estrogen and testosterone.
Okay, then.
Personally, I was born outwardly female. I've got XY chromosomes and I don't have a uterus or ovaries, but I did have undescended testes.
So, I mean, when did you discover all that? Because obviously, as you were growing up, you wouldn't have known, would you?
No, I didn't find out for definite what was going on with me until I was 19. I thought something about me was different from the age of about 13, just because puberty wasn't happening for everybody else around me. But I couldn't pinpoint what that was. It was only when I didn't start having any periods like all the other girls were doing that it came to light that there might be something different. I did see my GP about it, and they had me get blood tests done every 6 months to check on hormone levels. And he always told me that things were fine, that there was nothing to be concerned about. He thought my hormones were going in the right direction and I'd have a period soon. And then I think it was about a year after him saying that, things hadn't started. And he said, oh, well, perhaps you're just going to be one of those people who doesn't have periods, which I thought was a bit weird, in that he wouldn't investigate any further. But then when I moved to Norwich for university, I saw a different GP and she looked at some old blood test results and she didn't think that they were typical at all because I'd got very high testosterone levels, much would be expected for a woman normally. Then after being examined by an endocrinologist and then another endocrinologist at a specialist clinic in London, I was finally told that I was intersex and I had something called Androgen Insensitivity Syndrome. That means that although genetically, I suppose you could say I was supposed to have been born male, my body just doesn't react to testosterone at all. So I developed as female, I just didn't have the internal organs to go along with it.
Right. Okay. And
so
how old
that was
were
a heck
you?
of a journey.
Yeah, I bet it was. So, I mean, how old were you when you found all this out?
I was 19, so
Okay.
I'd moved away from university. I was sort of striking out on my own and was having to deal with finding out all of that.
Wow. That must have been a lot to handle at that time, especially.
Yeah, it was. But I got supportive friends and family, so it was good in that regard
Oh,
that
that's
I'd got
good.
who were around me to support me. And although a lot of people around me couldn't understand exactly what I was going through, it
Mm-hmm.
was not their moral support and emotional support.
Mm. So did you ever connect with, I mean, people who do understand? I don't know, do you know any other intersex people?
Yeah, I've met a few intersex people over the years, and as soon as I'd got my diagnosis, I joined a Facebook group for people with androgen insensitivity syndrome, and that's people all over the world in that group. I've only met a couple of them in person a few
Mm-hmm.
years ago, but that felt really good to have people to even just online to talk to and who were going through the same or similar situations. And I found out information, especially about hormone replacement therapy, that I didn't just have to take estrogen, and testosterone was a viable option because I had to have my testes removed because they said there was a small risk of cancer if they were left in.
Right.
So I have to take hormone replacement therapy,
Mm-hmm.
which was a big journey in itself. But to begin with, I was just given estrogen just as a sort of default because I'm female externally. And, but I didn't get on very well with it, played with my emotions greatly and made me put on a lot of weight and things like that. And it was
Mm.
only to other people with androgen sensitivity that I found out that it was possible to be prescribed testosterone to take instead, and it would do the same function to protect my bones from getting osteoporosis. And so the next time I saw my endocrinologist, I asked if I could start on testosterone because I'd heard other people had been
Mm-hmm.
taking it well, and he just said, "Yeah, that's fine."
Oh,
So
wow.
it's been great speaking with other intersex people because you
Oh,
find
wow, I
out so
bet,
much
yeah.
more.
Because it's not necessarily a subject that even your doctor would know enough about to really help you, is it?
No, I think I've informed more doctors about this condition than they've informed me. Because often they'll see testosterone on my prescription list and ask, "What is that for?" And I have to
Right.
give an explanation about what it is and why I have to take it, because most of them have never come across androgen insensitivity or any variation of intersex.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so I'm just wondering about why was it necessary for you to look into hormone therapy at all? What if you hadn't done that?
Well, it all started actually with the first appointment I had at a specialist clinic in London, found out that I was intersex. They advised me I needed to have a gonadectomy to remove the internal testes. There was this small cancer risk. After I'd had that operation, because my body wouldn't be producing any hormones on its own, I would need to take a hormone replacement to stop me getting osteoporosis. So I needed to protect my bones. It's similar to when women go through the menopause and then end up having to take hormone replacement therapy to prevent osteoporosis. It's very similar to that because once women go through the menopause and their reproductive organs aren't doing what they were, they're at a greater risk of osteoporosis. So it's similar to that.
Right, because I'm
Very
just like
complicated.
thinking, yeah, from a biological perspective. So it is either the ovaries or the testes that produce these hormones, right? And since you did not have ovaries, but you didn't know, the testes were producing these hormones, but when you had them removed, there was nothing left to make these hormones. Is that how it works?
Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
Right, okay, yeah. How fascinating. Yeah. So, what sort of other consequences does this have for you? I mean, I guess is hormone therapy, is that something you're going to have to keep doing indefinitely?
Yeah, that is something that is going to go on permanently. I mean, I started the hormone replacement when I was 19 after I had the operation, and I'm now 28, but
Mm.
it's going on forever. Unless they come up with some radical new treatment, I'm not going to be able to stop taking hormones
Hmm.
at all.
Yeah. So, I mean, how are you with that now? Do you feel, I mean, is it kind of balanced for you? Is it working for you, what you're doing at the moment with regards to hormones?
Yes, now I'm taking testosterone instead of estrogen. I feel much more balanced emotionally and physically. I'm not getting any of the same effects I got from the estrogen. Because with the estrogen, it felt like going through puberty again, which
Wow.
was awful. So I
I
got
was
a
going to say,
lot of,
once is enough of that, right?
yeah, once was definitely enough, but not going through it again was awful.
I'll bet.
With having growing pains in the chest and things like that, and
Mm.
so
Although I
weight.
assume your puberty, because of your, that because of being intersex, I guess your puberty was different as you already described. So, I mean, different from other girls, right? So, I mean, what was that
Yes.
like? What was that like for you the first time around?
So first time round, instead of developing the body underarm hair or pubic hair, I didn't develop any of that, and I had a bit of breast development, but not a massive amount. I did gain a little bit of weight around my hips, but that was about it really. I didn't get anything like what other people got. Obviously, I didn't get periods, which was a big thing that people expect for puberty. Puberty was a bit strange in that it in two sections, I suppose. From the ages of about 10 till 13, I had body development, like the bit of development in my breast area, and then nothing happened at all until I was about 17. And then I got a bit more development of breast tissue, and that was painful, to be honest. And I've heard that's quite common among people who've got androgen insensitivity, that puberty happens in these two distinct stages.
Right.
And to go through puberty again a couple of years later was not good.
Wow. Yeah. I mean, what was it like besides that, going through all that, at that age? I mean, did you get picked on because of it? I mean, did people? Well, I don't know, because obviously, from what you're saying is like because you thought you were a girl, basically, right?
Yeah.
But then some things that quote unquote should have happened didn't happen. Did people give you a hard time? Or like,
Nobody ever particularly gave me a hard time about that. All my sort of immediate friends knew that I didn't have periods and things like that. And I
mm,
think they were as mystified as I was as to why that wasn't happening. But
mm,
nobody gave me a hard time because I don't think it was that obvious to other
mm.
people around me.
Yeah, except maybe
That
people who knew you well that you talked to, I suppose.
yeah, people
Yeah.
who knew me well knew that these things weren't happening for me,
Hmm.
but nobody ever gave me a hard time about it. I think some people were intrigued by what could possibly be happening, but then again, so was I.
Yeah.
So I was lucky in that regard that nobody gave me a hard time.
Yeah. Yeah. As I mentioned just now before we sort of started the recording, you were on Queer Britain, an episode of Queer Britain. You were featured in that, weren't you? Where
Yes.
you spoke a little bit about it with a Riyadh. Did anything come of that? Did you hear from people? Did you find support somewhere, or did others say to you, thank you so much for that? It really helped me understand more of like maybe what I'm going through or what someone close to me is going through.
Yeah, I did. After that, I had quite a lot of messages and comments from people on social media saying
Hmm.
sharing your story. It was really interesting. I didn't know even that being intersex existed. I
Mm-hmm.
had messages from a lot of friends saying didn't really know what was going on with you, but thanks for explaining that. And at the job I was working at the time, because I was working for a large corporation, and their LGBT network, people within that found my story on Queer Britain really interesting,
Mm-hmm.
and I got interviewed for an article that was put on the intranet for our company, and
Mm-hmm.
a lot of positive feedback from that, including I remember one person in particular commented on that to say when I saw the headline of this article, I I thought it was going to be a load of old rubbish, basically.
Mm-hmm.
Read it all. I feel educated, and it's changed my mind about what I actually thought I was going to read.
Wow.
Because sometimes people react to headlines and buzzwords about these sorts of things,
Oh, yeah.
gender and sex, and make a snap decision about what they think about it without even taking the time to understand what things like intersex, non-binary and trans actually mean.
Yeah, yeah. So, I mean, in your sort of journey through all this and with gender especially, what do you understand gender to be? And what does that even mean to you now?
I think I have quite a complex relationship with gender. I think just because growing up, we're all made to think that there is just these two particular boxes, if you like, of male and female, and that's how everyone has to be. I think there are just as many ideas of gender identity or gender expression as there are people on the planet, because
Yeah.
nobody can experience gender in exactly the same way. It's a feeling within you that you can't necessarily explain. I know I feel the way I do about gender, which is that I don't feel entirely female or entirely male. I feel a mix of the two. Some days I might feel more on the masculine side, and other days on the more feminine side. But in my head, I am me. I remember being at school and feeling outside of what the boys were like, and also outside of what the girls were like. And I would always had this sense of being something other than what everybody else was. And I couldn't pinpoint it. I didn't even hear the term non-binary until I was well into my 20s.
Mm-hmm.
And I finally had a word for what I felt about myself, and a lot of confusion and struggle, I suppose, that I'd gone through over the years. Because for quite a long period, I'd sort of struggled with this idea of, well, I don't feel entirely female. I don't feel that that necessarily describes who I am. Does this mean that I am male? Does this mean that I should present myself in that particular way? Is that the right thing for me to do? And within myself, I knew that I didn't completely identify as male and that I never would. So coming to the realization that I was something other than these two particular boxes was quite comforting, because I wasn't one way or the other myself. And I think that's something that's really important for people to understand, that you have some people who are cis, but they are perfectly happy living and identifying as the gender that they were given, if you like, at birth. There are other people who are trans and feel differently to the gender identity they had given to them, as it were. And then there are other people who feel different to the gender they were given at birth, but also don't feel particularly one way or the other. And I think it's really important to acknowledge that those people exist, because I think I've heard so many times people saying that people identify as non-binary or as gender fluid for attention, or that it's just people trying to be different and stand out. And that's really ridiculous, because people who are non-binary just want to get on and live their lives the same as anyone else. They don't want to
like
be
being who they authentically are. And I was thinking, if you want to get attention, there are different ways of getting attention that's, less stigmatized and potentially dangerous, right? Oh my God.
Yeah. I mean, I feel any kind of alternative gender identity or presentation, people talk about people wanting just to be different and to get attention. And I was out as queer, to put it in a broad sense, when I was at school. I came out to a friend as bisexual when I was 12, but then people sort of say, oh, you can't be bi, there's no such thing, you're either gay or you're straight, you're just doing this for attention. And then I sort of get pegged as, oh, well, you're a lesbian, that's what you are. You're either gay or straight, you've got to be one or the other, you've got to choose, essentially. And that's sort of how I feel non-binary people are being spoken about and what they're being told these days, which is you've got to be male or female, you've got to choose, you can't be anything other than one of those two. Getting attention, you can get attention in far safer ways than out as non-binary. I mean, I've dyed my hair purple. I think that's going to grab far more attention than anything else. And it's far safer for me to just have my hair purple than it would be to say that I identified as something just for the sake of it.
Yeah, absolutely. Wow, you have quite a story. I'm sure it will be very informative for people. It's been really informative for me as well. When babies are born, obviously when you were born, you appeared female, right? But there are also occasions situations where babies are born and their physical, like the outside, the genitals are not completely male or female. I've heard that, people or babies get, the surgery is performed on babies to make them more binary when their genitals are, not quite one or the other. Do you know anything about that?
I do know from talking to other intersex people and knowing other intersex people who've got other differences of sexual development, which are different variations on what it means to be intersex. I do know people who were given surgery as infants, and their doctors and indeed their parents do seem to have this desire to normalise, if you like, a child's genitals to make them fit into one box or the other. There is this stigma in society of a child being born and you can't clearly assign it to being male or female. And rather than letting a child make their own decision as they get older, doctors do force unnecessary surgery onto intersex infants and intersex children, and indeed coercing intersex adults into having surgeries that they don't necessarily need. And there is a massive campaign amongst intersex people and our allies to eradicate this practice of unnecessary surgery on intersex infants, and that the only time surgery should be performed on intersex infants is if there's some medical necessity that means the genitals need some kind of small alteration. For example, if they're not going to be able to go to the toilet properly, of course, there needs to be something to be done about that, because a child needs to be able to pee. That's quite basic, but they're not just altering a child's genitals to allow them to pee. They're doing it to make the child's body conform to this standard that society has. What a lot of people, intersex people, would say is to leave the child's genitals alone, so that in the future the child can make a decision for themselves when they are an appropriate age, if they want to have any surgery to change what is there, or if they're just happy to stay as they are. And that's a really important thing to do, because intersex people need to be afforded bodily autonomy. That is, that they make decisions about their own body and nobody else makes the decisions for them, because doing that is completely unfair. We wouldn't do that to non-intersex children. Nobody would give birth to a baby girl and a doctor would then turn to them and say, wouldn't you rather have a boy, because we can do some surgery for that if you want us to. That just sounds totally ridiculous. But when you say the same for an intersex child, people think that it's a really great idea, because they don't want to tell other people that their child can't be clearly defined as male or female.
Yeah, wow, that makes a lot of sense. Like how the way you just put it, it is ludicrous, isn't it, when you think about it that way? Yeah,
it's completely ludicrous, and it just all comes back to this binary idea of male and female, and that your body is supposed to look a certain way.
Yeah,
and we shouldn't be forcing that upon children. It's such a drastic change to be given vaginoplasty or phalloplasty, and you can end up with a child who grows up incredibly miserable, to put it mildly, because they've had their body altered with no say whatsoever, and they don't align with the body that they've been given, what's been forced upon them by a doctor or by their parents. People are essentially being mutilated just because they don't look quite right, and intersex genital mutilation needs to end, and it needs to end now.
Amen to that. Is there any support group or activist organisation to do with that?
There is a particular group called Interact. They're to do with intersex advocacy, and there is also Intersex UK, who do a lot of the same work, information about what it means to be an intersex person, and fighting against the intersex genital mutilation. Those are a couple of the groups that are out there and available for support for people who are intersex or people who just want to know more about what being intersex means.
Okay, is there anything else that you'd like to add or that you'd like people to know about intersex?
I think one thing I would want everyone to know is that every intersex person's life and journey through what being intersex means is completely different. There isn't one overarching umbrella statement that could cover what intersex means to every single person, just because everybody's experience is so unique. So just because somebody has met an intersex person, that doesn't mean that what they went through or what difference of sexual development they have, that's not the same for every other person.
Mm-hmm.
It's a very individual thing.
Yeah. Well, I think that sounds like a great time to wrap up. Thank you so much for talking to me about all this. I look forward to sharing it with the world.
Well, thanks very much for interviewing me about it.
You can find out more details on the website at 50shadesofgender.com/Sarah with an H, where you can also read the transcript and find details about the organisations Sarah mentioned, which was Intersex UK and Interact. Thank you for listening to the 50 Shades of Gender podcast. You can find us online at 50shadesofgender.com and on social media. If you like what we're doing here and you want to support us, you can do so by becoming a patron on Patreon. Visit patreon.com/50 Shades of Gender. We hope you will listen again. Until then, stay curious and open-minded.